Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we'll give you a little update on what the state legislature has done, but perhaps more importantly, what it hasn't done. But first, how about this, an important healthcare update. Telemedicine and Lyme disease, you got to stay with us for all of that.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, as often is the case, we bring in the folks from the Pennsylvania Medical Society, a great source for information. We care about your health. I'm sure you care about your health. And I know the guy sitting across from me cares about everybody's health. I'm speaking, of course, about Dr. Theodore Christopher, MD. He's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. And boy, we've got some wonderful topics. Let me put it this way, doctor, and you'll straighten me out if I'm wrong. Telemedicine, is it the future? Or is it here now?
It's here now, and it is the future.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's talk about why it's even being considered. I'll put it another way. Explain what telemedicine is. Maybe we better start with that. What is it?
So telemedicine is it's a remote way for a doctor to see a patient through a video screen, and it's not face-to-face. So that's the
sure.
It's a point. It could be at home. It could be at work. It could be at another site. So it's a way to communicate with your physician from a remote site.
Okay. Now, its benefits are, I think, fairly obvious, but why don't you outline a couple of the important ones? You can't get to see the patient, you're removed for some reason. Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you. So, it's being used widely across the spectrum. So an example is with stroke. It's been used for stroke for a long time.
Oh, really?
So if you're in the emergency room and you have symptoms of a stroke and a neurologist is someplace else,
yeah.
or a neurosurgeon is, then they can actually see the patient and examine the patient by a robot who's in the emergency room and actually direct care. And as you know, stroke is a time-dependent diagnosis.
Right.
And so they can actually treating a patient with powerful medications to reverse a stroke. And so that's one example. The newest example that I think is just fantastic is with surgery cases. So if you have surgery and you get sent home and you need a post-op check of your wound, rather than make the patient come all the way back into the hospital, pay $50 for parking, and wait a while to see the doctor, this can be done at home.
Yeah.
And so the surgeon can actually see the patient.
It's amazing. Now, if I understand correctly, it's already being utilized in our state, but yet there's legislation that you all think is essential to help further its implementation. Is that did I state that correctly?
Yeah, so there's no real guidelines yet for it at the state, at the statutory level. So there's a bill out there that was passed by the Senate in mid-June, and it's going to go before the House. It actually defines the statutory definition of telemedicine and set some quality guidelines for care, the rules, so to speak, as to how to use telemedicine. It also asks the insurance companies to reimburse the hospitals and physicians.
No,
for
I got to
telemedicine.
stop you right here. You mean there are some insurance companies that won't?
Well, they have some concerns. Or
you want to make sure that it gets done?
They have some concerns. I think that it'll be overused, I think. But,
I get it. Abused, yeah.
Abused in 5 minutes, let's say, and you're doing like a lot of these things in billing for them. So it asks that the insurance companies, I think, do reimburse for this, and I think that will be done. And then it assures that you have a video, I think, connection, if you will, with the patient, not just by phone.
Okay. So would this, is this the possibility that this in the future, and who knows where we're heading with electronics and with computers, and is this something that could be done by a physician in his or her office and with folks at home? Are we heading there, or
that's
is
exactly
it being
what we're
done
talking
now?
about. That's exactly what we're talking about. And so, for example, at my hospital, we have a telehealth doctor in a booth in an urgent care center who can tele-triage 3 or 4 patients in the emergency departments at 3 or 4 of our hospitals. And so he can log in and see if there's a wait at one emergency department. He can help triage those patients in that one emergency department and then move to a second emergency department. So it's really it's a game changer.
So what? Yeah, I mean, and what you're I was going to say what you're suggesting is in specifically revolutionary. The potential for medicine, as you accurately point out, providing it's not, you have to be careful with how it's used and so that it's not abused. And that's obviously why you want these guidelines in legislation to protect both the patient and the physician. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, Pennsylvania and Lyme disease are synonymous. You can say yes or no to that, and then we're going to break.
I'll talk about that. Yes.
Yes, I thought so. We'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. Joining me is Dr. Theodore Christopher. He is the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society and a frequent guest on the program. I'll tell you, I want to chat with the doc about Lyme disease. I mean, it's almost every day there's some story in a paper or on a radio program or something about Lyme disease and how important it is. Do you have any? Well, first of all, what's Lyme disease? Is that a dumb question?
Not dumb at all. So it's an infectious disease that is given to patients by a deer tick.
A deer tick, I got that.
And inside the tick is a bacteria that if the tick infects you or it is on you and bites you, then that bacteria goes into your bloodstream and causes you some problems.
And, I mean, are they life-threatening problems? Can they be?
Not
typically.
Usually. If it's not diagnosed, I think it can have some after effects. It can affect your heart and your brain and your spinal cord if you have it and it's not treated. And that's long-term, but usually not.
Now, you see why we have you on, to make sure that we all understand. I don't have to get my computer out and look at WebMD, which is where I get. All right, we'll skip all that. But Pennsylvania consistently ranks among the highest in the nation for Lyme disease, correct?
That's correct. So
we have deer running around everywhere.
I guess it's a great state for deer. But 1/4 of all the cases of Lyme diagnosed in the country are in Pennsylvania.
Are you serious?
1/4.
But I mean, I'm not being sarcastic now, but you can go almost anywhere in this state and you find deer. In my neighborhood where I live, they walk up and down the street.
In my yard.
You have the same thing?
Absolutely.
You have the same thing.
My backyard outside Philadelphia, so they're all over.
All right, this is the critical question. What should our viewers do, Pennsylvanians do, to protect themselves?
Yeah, so I think you have to have common sense, I think, prevention. So if you're hiking in a path, you have to stay in the center of the path. Don't go off into the woods where there's deer. If you're going to go hiking, tuck your pants into your socks because the tick crawls up.
Oh,
right? It doesn't fall out of trees. It crawls up. So it starts in the feet and so if there's no place to go in the skin, so that's one thing. Also, if you want to use DEET, which is a repellent, at least 20%, throw that on your skin if you're going to go hiking in the woods and you want to wear shorts. Wear light-colored clothing so you can see the tick. And then most important, after you're in the woods all day long, check your body. take a shower.
Yeah, great.
And check your body.
Sort of common sense, right?
But the ticks hide like behind your ear, in your belly button, behind your knees, in your hair.
Everywhere.
So you got to check these places. You need a friend.
Yeah, there you go.
And the friend has to check your body.
Well, this is, I think, of all the questions, I mean, that was a wonderful advice. How do you know, or I'll put it another way, what are the signs that you have? You conceivably, I'll put it that way, could have Lyme disease.
So there's a lot of myths out there, but it's vague symptoms. It's very common symptoms: headache, fever, rashes, joint pains.
A variety of things is what you're saying.
It's like a virus, so it's very nondescript. The best is if you see the tick. Right, so then you have awareness. It becomes very difficult to diagnose if you haven't found, if you have no recollection that the tick is on your body, or the tick was there. But if you see the tick, that's what you have to worry about.
Is the treatment the same as if you had a virus, or?
No, it's antibiotics. And so most viruses, you don't
the
use
antibiotics don't affect them. Yeah, bacteria,
Lyme disease,
yes, but, right.
You use antibiotics.
Okay, before I let you go, you did get some money out of this year's state budget, if I understand it right. About
yes,
$2.5 million, or what's that going to go for?
2.5. So I think most of it's going to go for education and surveillance. So, but for education, just tell the public what Lyme disease is. If you see a tick on your skin, how to pull it off, that kind of thing. So,
Building Healthy Communities, that's your awareness program?
Yes.
And PA Medical Society?
Yes.
Is that on your website?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on your website.
Extensively on our website.
Right. Well, I don't know that we have it. Look at this. I just asked. Just get on the website, right? And you can find it. I should know that. Look, this is a wonderful update, and you'll come back soon. And I enjoy doing these, and they're important to our viewers. And guess what we have to turn to now? The state legislature. You don't have to comment on that. Okay. We'll be back in a moment.
Thanks, Tom.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, welcome back. Joining me, as often is the case, is Angela Couloumbis. She's a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Marc Levy. He's with the Associated Press, two great reporters that cover all things going on in the state capitol, plus a little politics in between, right? Well, I won't even go into that. All right, look, the legislature did some things, but they also did not do some things. And perhaps we can talk about a couple of them, but Angela, I want to start with you about this, sizzling, controversial grand jury report on, the potential of sexual abuse in the Catholic diocese. And that report was supposed to be made public a couple of weeks ago. What's going on with that?
Well, there is a very fierce behind-the-scenes battle going on. A lot of it is happening under seal. What we know is last week the Supreme Court put a temporary stay on the report's public release. The report is expected to cover decades worth of alleged sexual abuse in 6 of the state's 8 Catholic dioceses. Wow. And as it stands right now, there is a group of unnamed individual and perhaps organizations who are fighting to prevent the release of the report because they feel that it will tread on their right to a clean reputation. Wow.
So the Attorney General of the state, Josh Shapiro, has been leading the charge to make that public. Is that right, Mark?
So it's his office that ran the grand jury. It's been a 2-year investigation of 6 Catholic dioceses in the state, and they've said all along that this report would become public at the end of June unless someone in the church or the dioceses try to stop it. And so there was a legal filing first to the grand jury judge supervising the grand jury,
right,
who denied it. Apparently they appealed to the Supreme Court, and a lot of this, like Angela said, is under seal, so
now,
we can't see everything that's happening.
Without getting into the details of it, two things. Number one, some of the people who said who went to the Supreme Court and said don't release it,
right,
are there potentially people who are named in it? Is that
That's
with
correct.
the word potential?
Yes,
Potentially.
there are people who are named in it, not charged criminally, but people who are named who believe that their reputation would be sullied.
I got it, because they would be associated with it by virtue of the
with
release.
alleged crimes.
Yeah, with it. But this is, there's a keg of dynamite sitting underneath a whole bunch of people and the church, I would think, right?
Absolutely, because it revives, once again, a very controversial and deeply emotional debate over either lifting the statute of limitations on child sexual abuse or creating a 2-year window to allow people who have aged out of the statute to sue.
I get it. Wow, well, of course, it's going to be big news, and it's not just going to be news in the state, and it's going to be news all over the country. All right, Marc, let's talk to two things that I'm going to relate, and you'll separate them out. Anti-hazing legislation, domestic violence legislation. Mm-hmm. Why is that important right now, given just what, in a sense, what we've just talked about, but more importantly, in general for the folks?
So both of these bills were spurred by certain events. One of the domestic violence, a package of domestic violence bills moved out of the Senate unanimously in March. One of them involves getting guns away from someone who has a domestic violence conviction or a restraining order against them. And when legislation involves guns, it becomes very hot button.
Right.
This, in part, was propelled by the Parkland, Florida high school shooting in February.
Oh, sure.
The other bill, anti-hazing bill, which would increase penalties for hazing, passed out of the Senate as well in recent months unanimously, and it was propelled by the death of a fraternity pledge last year at Penn State.
Penn State, right.
Timothy Piazza, after a night of drinking. They're both sitting in the House. They were high priorities for the Senate, and for various reasons, neither one made it out of the House yet.
We're going to run to a break. I want to pursue a couple of questions on that. I mean, this whole business of gun control legislation, most of us thought, particularly the one you mentioned, seems to be, what's so controversial about that? What's the holdup, and why can't there be a consensus on what I think most Pennsylvanians would agree just makes a lot of sense? We'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, Angela Couloumbis and Marc Levy join me, both reporters that cover the state capitol, among other things. All right, Marc, let's go. I want to get into one of these domestic violence areas of legislation. What is the problem with, if you have a domestic violence situation and the gun limits your gun? Can you explain that to me? I mean, there's certain things, and didn't that come out of the Senate, what, 50 to whatever it was, 49 or 50 to nothing? Go ahead.
It did. So it came out of the Senate 50 to nothing. Two active gun rights organizations, the National Rifle Association and Firearm Owners Against Crime, were both neutral on it. Mm-hmm. They had won some changes at the 11th hour to the bill as the Senate staff was scrambling to get it to the floor. And those changes prompted them to drop their opposition to it. It passed unanimously. It sat in the House for 3 months awaiting a committee vote. It got a committee vote last week, but with substantial changes. It got changes later in the week, and it had a lot of amendments filed. It was to some extent a fast-moving process, and it's not a simple bill. It's complicated.
Right.
The overarching theme here is the bill would order you to give up your guns far more quickly if you are convicted of a crime of domestic violence. It's a misdemeanor.
And
but
you couldn't give it just to someone in your family. It has to go
right
to a police.
That's one other provision. Another provision is if you have a final protection from abuse order against you, which is essentially a restraining order. You have to give up your guns. Right now, it's left to a judge's discretion.
Okay. Wow.
So the House inserted various provisions. A third provision involved getting rid of the part of the law now that if you have to give up your guns for some reason, you can give it to a friend or a family member as long as they don't live with you. So these bills would have gotten rid of that. It would have left it to law enforcement, your lawyer, a licensed firearms dealer, or some sort of firearms warehouse or
now this can be
armory.
taken up again in the fall, right? Even
That's
though they're
right.
going to have a truncated session,
That's right.
which we may get a chance to talk about. All right, let's see. There were demonstrators, do I got this right, up in the governor's office on the issue of redistricting, and 10,000 proposals to change it. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. So,
Redistricting, for those who might not remember, has been a gigantic issue this year. There was a state Supreme Court opinion that basically said the congressional maps, the state's congressional maps, are gerrymandered, and they were redrawn. And so there was that propelled essentially a tremendous debate about whether to create an independent commission to begin to oversee and draw maps going
right now,
forward.
the state legislature, in
That's
the form of a bill, ends up redrawing the map, and that's, go ahead.
Every 10 years.
Every 10 years.
After the census, so the next redrawing would start to occur in 2021. And there is a very finite period of time during which they can actually change the process because it requires a constitutional amendment.
Great point.
It is a measure that needs to pass in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. We are a week away from the deadline for them to get it passed. For this legislative session, for there to be for the measure to appear on the ballot for voters to decide. And there seems to be no willingness at this point for the House of Representatives, where the measure currently is, to return back to the Capitol to take a vote on it before next Thursday.
All right, before I let you go, Angela brought up at a point, the legislature is now into this situation where their own elections are up, 203 people in the House, half the Senate, 25, and they're not likely to do very much. They'll stay away until maybe the second week in September, Mark, and then come back for 2 or 3 weeks and take off for the election, and then the session's over, right?
Yeah, that's right. So traditionally, the fall session in election year is very shortened. So the House and Senate right now are looking at about 3 or 4 week sessions, which amounts to 9 to 12 days of floor voting. But those floor votes typically are designed to avoid controversial issues. Lawmakers want to be on the campaign trail. They want to be protecting their position, and they don't want to have to answer questions about something controversial.
All right, we're out of here. Thanks for coming on. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.